Hello viewers, today we discuss The Way of All Flesh, which is considered to be one of Samuel Butler's most entertaining works. Published posthumously in 1903, the work is considered a reaction against Victorian hypocrisy. The novel is semi-autobiographical and it was written between the years 1873 and 1884. It took a good 11 years for Butler to finish the work. The book describes the lives of 4 generations of the Pontifex family and narrates the events that shaped the life of the dumb-witted Ernest Pontifex. Ernest, who was the eldest son of Theobald Pontifex, a dull clergyman, leads a complicated life and eventually becomes a successful writer. Butler's novel is a critique of the institutions of family, religion, and exposes the hollowness of the Victorian society. Samuel Butler, an English-born writer born in December 1835, died on June 18, 1902. He was an iconoclastic Victorian writer whose work include Arion, 1872, The Way of All Flesh, and 1903. Samuel Butler was born in Nottinghamshire to Thomas Butler, an undistinguished clergyman. He was named after his grandfather, Dr. Samuel Butler, who was the headmaster of Shrewsbury School, who was eventually made the Bishop of Lichfield. Dr. Samuel Butler was an authoritative father. He was supposed to have been very harsh on his children, particularly on Thomas Butler, his son who wanted to join the Royal Navy. Thomas was instead forced to join the Anglican Church. Thomas Butler was also a dictatorial father. Thomas Butler and his son Samuel shared a strained relationship. Samuel Butler was sent to Cambridge, where he was tutored in the classics and was later forced by his father to join the Anglican Church. In 1858, Samuel joined the church, and for about a year, awaiting his ordination, he worked as a junior clergyman in a small London parish. In 1859, he turned agnostic and left the church. His father and other members of his family opposed his actions. The hostility of his father forced Samuel to migrate to New Zealand, where he amassed a fortune working on the sheep farms. He returned to England in 1864. In New Zealand, he collected material which shaped the writing of Arion. Arion, the name itself, sounds unique, and it is the inversion of the word nowhere. On his return to England, Butler pursued a literary career. He published Arion, a utopic novel, anonymously in 1872. Arion was influenced by his experience in New Zealand. The anonymity of the author led to intense speculation, and the work attracted the attention of the Victorian public. In 1874, when it was revealed that Samuel Butler authored Arion, he gained instant reputation. Post Arion, Butler worked on The Way of All Flesh. He wrote the novel between the years 1873 and 1884, but chose not to publish it in his own lifetime. Butler studied science, particularly the theories of evolution and Christianity, closely. He was also interested in Italian art. Butler's writing style is closer to that of the modernist authors. His admirers include George Bernard Shaw and E. M. Forster. Dear learners, let us look at the introduction to the novel The Way of All Flesh. The Way of All Flesh is the last novel of Samuel Butler. It was published posthumously. Many critics consider it as the best work of Butler. Butler wrote the novel over a period of 11 years. Since the novel was semi-autobiographical, he chose not to publish it in his own lifetime. The novel focuses on the dynamics that prevailed in the English families. Unlike majority of Victorian writers who attempted to construct the family as a benign institution which was quintessential to the construction of a strong society, Butler chose to depict a realistic picture of the family. The novel provides a vivid and realistic image of the church and family during the Victorian period. It describes the lives of 4 generations of Pontifex family. It documents the social and economic transformations of the Pontifex family. The novel states the quest for upward mobility could also result in the creation of domestic strife within a family. It describes in detail the modes that parents use to emotionally blackmail their children into submission. It demonstrates that family is a regressive institution which was used to stifle the goals and desires of an individual. The marriages documented in the novel are not happy. The couples marry and do not love each other, but only tolerate them. The novel also depicts the hypocrisy of the church. Butler reveals that young men educated at Cambridge and Oxford sought careers in the church not out of any genuine calling. They joined the church either due to parental or societal pressure or due to greed. The behavior of the clergy is no different from that of the laity. They are unforgiving and greedy. Butler suggests that parents should involve very little in the affairs of the children. The novel is very different from other Victorian novels. It adopts a modernist tone. Unlike most other works of Victorian fiction, it is also a documentary. In The Way of All Flesh, Overton, the godfather of the central character, narrates the story. Overton likes Ernest Pontifex, the central character in the novel, from the very beginning. Overton is well acquainted with the 3 generations of the Pontifex family. The novel begins with a realistic description of the life of the old-aged John Pontifex, a village carpenter. John Pontifex is a jolly character whose son, George Pontifex, rises in the world and becomes a leading publisher. George deems himself to be a self-made man and, unlike his father, adopts a strict demeanor. He loses his wife quite early in life and is harsh on his children and urges them always to live up to his high expectations. He bullies the dumb-witted Theobald the most. While at the university, Theobald is coerced by his father to become a minister. Theobald is not convinced about his calling, yet he joins the Anglican Church. During his tenure at a rural parish, Theobald is manipulated into marrying Christina, the daughter of a village clergyman. The main character of the novel, Ernest Pontifex, is the eldest son of Theobald and Christina, and is the first grandson of George Pontifex. George bequeaths Ernest a sum of £3,000 as inheritance. The money is deposited and Ernest is supposed to receive it at the age of 22. Ernest's boyhood is not a happy affair. From the outset, the relationship between Ernest and his children is strained. Theobald, as a minister, spends most of his time at home and seeks to control the activities of his children. Unlike George, Theobald is not a strong parent, yet he is successful in irritating his children. Among his children, Ernest is the most sensitive child and is irritated the most. Ernest likes nature and music. However, he is not allowed to spend time pursuing his interests. Christina is an opportunist and is unable to inspire confidence in Ernest. Thus, the relationship between Ernest and his hypocritical and domineering parents is always strained. Ernest's siblings side with their parents, thus isolating him further. Ernest's aunt Alethea is, however, aware of his plight and tries her best to protect Ernest. She takes rooms near Ernest's school and houses him during the holidays. She attempted to teach him carpentry. However, she dies before she can fulfill her dream of countering the parents' malign influence on the boy. Shortly before her death, Alethea secretly passes a small fortune into Overton's keeping with the agreement that once Ernest is 28, he can receive it. On completion of school, Ernest joins the Cambridge University. He likes the university but fares averagely in his academics. He is convinced by his parents to join the Anglican Church. He finds theology very cumbersome. He finds the divisions and controversies in the Church of England incomprehensible. Influenced by his colleagues at Cambridge, he starts out as an evangelical Christian. He falls for the lures of the High Church. As he joins the church, he receives his inheritance, but he is duped out of his money by another clergyman. Ernest tries to live amongst the poor and preach the gospel. However, his faith in the Bible is severely damaged. Under the pressures of poverty and theological doubt, he seeks to vent his frustrations on a woman. He is accused of sexually assaulting a woman whom he has perceived to be a prostitute and is sent to jail. In jail, Ernest seems to regain his agency. His health deteriorates faster and his parents disown him. His godfather Overton seeks him out. Overton regularly visits him in prison. In prison, Ernest learns how to tailor and decides to pursue tailoring on the completion of his prison sentence. On his release from the prison, he meets Ellen, a former housemaid of his parents. Despite Overton's reservations, Ernest marries Ellen. With the financial backing of Overton, Ellen and Ernest establish a second-hand cloth shop. The shop initially is a success. Ernest and Ellen have 2 children, and Ernest seems to be poised for a successful life. However, in due course, Ernest realizes that Ellen is both a bigamist and an alcoholic. Overton intervenes at this point again. Overton arranges for the separation and pays Ellen a stipend. Ellen happily leaves Ernest and with another man moves to America. Overton gives Ernest a job and takes him on a trip to continental Europe. Ernest is crestfallen. When Ernest becomes 28, he receives his aunt Alethea's gift. Overton has invested the sum carefully. The fortune is quite large and it permits Ernest to pursue writing as a full-time career. As Overton arranges for the separation, he also employs a family to take care of Ernest's children. The home that has adopted the kids of Ernest is a happy family, and the children, named Alice and George, easily acclimatize themselves with their foster parents. Ernest's writings are controversial. He returns to the family home only as his mother is about to die. Post his mother's death, Ernest lives with the family. his father's influence over him wanes as Theobald's own position as a clergyman is reduced in stature. Towards the end of the novel, as Christina dies, Ernest discovers that his father Theobald never loved his wife. As his father, Ernest realizes that his siblings had no love for their parents either. Most of the Victorian novels attempted to construct family as a desirable social unit. The social novels of the 19th century, including the works of Charles Dickens and Thomas Hardy, sought to create stable family life as a means to happy existence. In most novels, the absence of domestic stability was attributed as one of the important reasons for the unhappiness of the individuals. The childhood misery of most Victorian protagonists arise out of a lack of a solid family. Most protagonists feel unloved and long to belong to a family. The prominent characters like Oliver Twist yearn for families, while grown-up men like Henchard in The Mayor of Casterbridge regret the actions that led to the destruction of their families. In contrast to most of the English novels written in the 19th century, The Way of All Flesh is replete with stable families. However, the families are unhappy, and Butler reveals the hollowness of family as an institution in 19th century England. The social life in 19th century England was very different from that in the 18th century. Unlike John Pontifex, who allowed his children to pursue normal childhood, the fathers in the subsequent generations caused irreparable damage to the family life, and it affected the relationship between the members of the family. In order to satisfy the expectations of family members, individuals had to endure miserable lives. The cause of Theobald Pontifex's or Ernest Pontifex's misery is not due to the lack of a family. They have large families comprising of parents, siblings, uncles, aunts, and cousins. It is the members of the family who cause them anxiety throughout their lives. The families are dysfunctional and are made of authoritative and sadistic parents, opportunistic children, and scheming siblings. The letters that George wrote to Theobald reveal that George was a demanding father who cared little for his son's happiness. George, in turn, is opportunistic and pushes his son towards a life that he does not enjoy. Likewise, Christina and Theobald disown Ernest when he is arrested. They detest the fact that Ernest has inherited his aunt's wealth and is not punished adequately for his sins. The parents are unhappy that they are not in a position to patronize Ernest. They are unhappy that Ernest is financially and emotionally independent of them. Thus, Butler reveals that not all parents place their children above themselves. The siblings in the novel compete with each other in an unhealthy way. John Pontifex and his wife are unhappy as Theobald sires a son. Ernest's siblings, Joseph and Charlotte, are jealous of him. As the siblings realize that Alethea has not left them any property after her early demise, some of them even refuse to complete the funeral. Finally, the novel also reveals that even long-standing marriages can be loveless affairs. The marriage of Christina and Theobald, which was arranged after an elaborate manipulation, is a loveless one. It is clear that Theobald never loved Christina but went ahead with the marriage only due to societal pressures. In contrast, the lives of Ernest and his children are healthier as he rejects the idea of a family. In contrast, individuals create healthy relationships outside the family. Alethea does not trust any of her siblings and entrusts her entire wealth to Overton, who's a friend. Likewise, the relationships that Ernest forges in his lifetime are with his friends in London. Thus, the novel depicts an alternative image of the family as a dysfunctional unit which provides little comfort and solace to individuals. It points out that virtues of family are always overrated. Dear viewers, let us examine how The Way of All Flesh is considered a modern novel. The Way of All Flesh was written over a period of 11 years and was not published till 1903. Technically, it makes it a novel of the 20th century. But it was a novel which was written in the high noon of the Victorian period. The style of the novel and the themes that it dealt with are quite different from those found in most Victorian novels. When it was published, immediately post the death of Samuel Butler, it was considered a reaction against Victorian hypocrisy. The novel won Butler numerous admirers in the 20th century. George Bernard Shaw, E.M. Forster, George Orwell were amongst these admirers. It is considered a modernist novel as it critically describes the dynamics of social institutions without making many explicit statements. Butler said things that other people knew but didn't care or dare to say. The novel is written in a clear, simple, straightforward way. The vocabulary used is also simple. George Orwell is supposed to have called The Way of All Flesh a great book, as it provides an honest picture of the relationships between father and son. He attributed it to the fact that Butler was a truly independent observer who was courageous enough. Butler also used psychoanalytical modes of thought in his fiction. With these methods, helped to create a sense of lovable helplessness around Ernest Pontifex. They also aided in the creation of an air of restlessness amongst Christina and Theobald. The novel also makes use of various forms such as letters, wills, and other such documents. The style adopted in the novel is very minimalist in nature. The tenor is smooth, and Butler, unlike his Victorian counterparts, does not seem anxious to convert his readers. Some of these traits were shared by modernist writers. Hence, a few critics like Clara Stillman have called him a mid-Victorian modern, a title which I think is apt, as he had won the admiration of many masters of modern prose. Samuel Butler was also a skeptic. It is not to suggest that he was not political. However, unlike his Victorian contemporaries, including George Eliot, Charles Dickens, Thomas Hardy, or Thomas Hughes, Butler was not an avid supporter of political causes. He believed that politics were of various nature. He was a strong believer of science and was a keen follower of scientific developments. However, that did not stop him from critiquing the theories of evolution. Since his work is not explicitly political in nature, yet it problematizes social institutions, it can also be considered a modern piece of writing. It is very interesting to note that John Pontifex plays a significant part in the novel. A village carpenter who lived most of his life in 18th century, Pontifex appears as a contrast to all the characters of the 19th century. He is the only benign personality of the novel, and his character is very different from that of his son George or his grandson Theobald. It is interesting to note that John Pontifex's character is fleshed out in detail in the novel The Way of All Flesh. Since The Way of All Flesh focuses on the dynamics of human relationships in family, like the work of Lawrence, it can be considered a modern novel. It is also a commentary on the nature of change that has occurred between the father and son relations over a period of time. Butler is arguing that the familial structure in the 19th century, just like the church and the finance, underwent a massive transformation as the nature of men changed. It is not to suggest that these changes brought in a nature in the change of man. The changes were mutual and were organic. John is the character which the reader can use as a touchstone to compare the characters in the subsequent generations. It is interesting to note that the character of John is very similar to the character of the main protagonist, Ernest. In many ways, this work is hence considered a modern novel. Dear friends, in this lesson, we looked at the work of Samuel Butler. We also discussed the plot of The Way of All Flesh in detail. In the next lesson, we will discuss the main characters in the novel The Way of All Flesh. We will also investigate how the idea of wealth and inheritance is depicted in Butler's novel. I hope you have all enjoyed the lesson, and I will see you again. Thank you.